while you talked about getting into a journey over time, very often for new brands, it's how do you break the ice and how do you get familiar. Let's take this very name that we've begun with. Anybody who happens to come upon this channel in future will first look at Old Bandicoots. They will stop to see what this is about. Depending on how, whether the conversation appeals to them or doesn't, they'll hang around for a little while to listen, and then they'll begin to form an impression of what this whole thing is about. I think it all starts with a name. Like with every single, we have our own individual personal names, and our contexts are understood by the people that we interact with, because we're very different people in class and we're very different people at home, or with friends and with teachers. We seem to effortlessly slip into certain modes of behavior depending on where we are. Unfortunately, a brand is stuck with a certain quality. It can't be chameleon like. It has to be the same irrespective. So a bank in the middle of a party of youngsters will stick out like a sore thumb, exactly like the guy who wears a suit and lands up at the party and expects to be mingle. It doesn't work. But all of these things come to you only after you've spent time understanding the business.
We were working on Godrej hair dye. It was in a bus stop that I was standing. I was passing by on the way to the office, and then I noticed some guy, some college student guy with a backpack kind of stuff. He called some lady, and then I don't remember the exact sequence. Maybe he got in her way or something, and then he said, "Oh, sorry, auntie," or something like that. And her immediate reaction was to turn back, and she was looking at that showroom behind her, the
When did
glass,
I become
and
anti?
she was looking at herself. When did I become auntie? So when I reached the office and I said, "Hey, why don't we?" Obviously, I didn't tell them that this happened downstairs. So no, we call this thing by various names, insight, this, that, and the other. But it is now suddenly the meaning of why you have to be young is brought to you saying, listen, otherwise what happens is the world thinks that you are older than you feel. In your mind, you are still one Didi, you are still Bhaiya, but what you are actually is your uncle. So, somewhere a hair dye has a better chance of penetrating that mindset and saying, listen, why do you want to become an uncle and an auntie so soon, man? You have so much ahead of you, kind of stuff. Without getting it all, that simple story was understood by everybody. I'm saying this storytelling, the humanizing of will remain. Now, therefore, what is my ingredient that goes into it? Why do you care? Why do I care? We don't know. We hope they're putting something good and not harmful, and we expect some good company like Godrej to have some nice things in it, I suppose, or at least not harmful things in it, because the story takes care of what it means to use a product like that, and only
Yeah.
stories can do that. So I would say, if you're paying your creative director, copywriters, art directors to do anything at all at an agency, it is this ability to bring up stories so that you're converting something that the client has in his mind and who has a benefit to offer is not brought across into the world in a dull as ditch water kind of manner,
Yeah.
but
And
telling
yeah.
through
And a
story.
features list as opposed to, or a benefit list.
I would go further to say that that sort of begs the question then, what is this brand? There are many views on this, and at least my sharing of it would be along these lines, that on the surface of things, branding involves styling, type font, colors, the way you do things, and the way you put across. And Pepsi is basically blue, Coke is red, and so on. Kodak, Nikon use yellow prominently. That is the necessary but the identity part of the brand. And most established brands, this has already been settled. Therefore, if you are joining the journey, this is a given. Therefore, your first part of the education is to understand that sometimes we use language like this, we don't use language like that, or we use these colors and no other colors, and we don't use tertiary colors, and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. That together can be taken as branding at a certain level, an important point. The second part of branding is the trickiest part, which is the, what do you say, what do you stand for? When people say Safola, for instance, what comes to your head? That, oh yes, Safola, yeah, I know it's for the heart and health. Who put that idea in your head? At the end of the day, it's an oil. It was made in a plant, and
Yeah.
it was poured into something. It was made from safflower seeds or whatever they make it from, and it was poured into some can, and then they sold it to you. that this is good for you. In fact, if you went and visited somebody's house and if you saw safola somewhere in their kitchen or something, you might even ask, does somebody in the house have a, or if the
Yeah,
association is that strong now,
it's
that you
that's
can
true.
see the product and come, that is branding. My feeling is these days we are doing a lot of the former, the superficial, the color bit of branding, the design bit of branding, very, very necessary. And probably we are in a hurry, or we don't know how, or we are not doing enough of this second bit of branding.
LG and Samsung. I remember this. I do this with people I meet, and I try and do this in my own buying pattern. So there was this point about 10, 12 years ago when I was looking at a flat screen television, and I walked into this showroom which had this massive display. At that point, it was all 32-inch televisions. It was not 55-inch and the curved and all of those things which have come in the last 4 or 5 years. So I was looking at this entire display and then immediately, looking at the price tag below. So you had the Samsung, which was 48, 50,000. You had the LG, which was 50, the Sony's, which were at 70. And somewhere in the middle, for a display that looked just as good in comparison, because when you looked at it, they all looked the same, was this brand called Moser Bayer. So I looked at that, and the price of that was 22,000 bucks. It was 50% lower than all the others. So then branding went out of the window. I just said, hey, this is the thing that works. I get 32 inches, I get it at 22,000 bucks, and it's from Mozabai. It's not from some company that I don't know at all. Okay. Now I bought that whole thing, and my post purchase rationalization was that Moser buyer wants to get into TVs. So the first way they can do it is to contract for one, what do you say, batch of TVs that they will, get out into the market. They'll have a set of specs where they can slice off a small bit of profits after having getting it manufactured somewhere. I thought that they have done the work of selecting the specs for me. And since this is a launch, they will make extremely, they'll be cautious about ensuring that their quality is okay enough. And that TV lasted for 6, 8 years. I sold it at practically half the price that I had bought it for. That's one example. The other example is Dropbox. I saw it right from the beginning. When you look back now, every other guy is trying to tell you, I will give you 3 GB for so much price. I'll give you 10 GB for so much. They're all selling storage. But this illustrates precisely the point that you were making about stories. So, Dropbox on their website early on talked about how this guy was planning a holiday, and then he said he would he would be surfing sites on his laptop, and then he'd be looking at ticketing or some other options and attractions on the mobile phone. And then when he was going on a trip, he had to sort of upload pictures, send them off to people, figure out how to upload it during all that time. It was this whole thing of him moving through one swamp and getting past alligators and getting, and this was drawn in minimalistic animation. It was not photographs, nothing. And it was talking about how you could do this on any trip if you had a Dropbox account, because if you worked on the laptop, it would get seamlessly updated on your mobile phone and on any other devices that you paid the price for. Ultimately, it was storage, but they understood the difficulty of trying to juggle multiple points of, otherwise I have to send a file to my laptop, I have to email it to myself, then I have to click on that and then try and figure out if this whole thing can open. All of these things, they made it out to be that this is something you required, and they gave you a real life case. They gave you something that you could instantly identify with. So then the point, it could have been put as a benefit which says seamlessly syncs up all your devices. They didn't say that. They showed you a point of where it could work. So I'm giving you two completely different ends of the spectrum. One is where the brand gave you a reason to buy related to your life. And the second one just gave you such a fabulous deal by going in the middle of a whole group of others. It's like this guy who doesn't deserve to be at the party but is dressed in the same threads and somehow stands out because he seems to have the pizzazz to carry it off.
It was a TV that you bought, right?
Yeah, it was a TV that I bought.
No,
And
for some very good reasons, I suppose that brand of TV no longer exists. So that probably says a lot. So you can't
yeah,
do it that cheap. But on the other hand, there will always be people. No, there will always be people
yeah,
who buy at
yeah,
various price points. We can't do a thing. All you're trying to
right,
do in advertising as much as you can is to influence them. I suppose for
right,
all the stuff that Dropbox has done, there are other people like Backblaze and so many others which people must be preferring over there. I'm sure
right.
it's not like once you do the right thing, everybody, the whole world beats a path to your door
That's
is not
the
going to happen.
yeah,
But you're
yeah,
going to get some probably a more an unfair share of the audience to your door, and that's good enough at your price point, at your stuff.
yeah,
But Sony
yeah.
still exists, and they have always managed to command a premium. So in
Right,
many
right,
people's eyes, including my own, if I wanted to buy a TV, I would find it very difficult to not buy a Sony, for instance. I don't know why. It's always been
right.
good, and it's always lasted.
Even though
And
Sony actually buys its, I was told they buy their displays from Samsung now.
that Sony actually buys its tubes or whatever that stuff inside is called from a company called Aiwa, AIWA, which was
Right, right.
not such a well-known name. Probably it is a
Yeah, yeah,
Japanese or Korean brand. I'm not sure. But the Aiwa brand was also available at probably 60% of the Sony's price. So basically,
right.
if that was true, I would have still bought Sony because it had Sony on it, and rather than
Yeah,
knowing some Aiwa, if it is true that Aiwa is the same as Sony in this sense, and this one costs 30,000 and that one costs 60,000, why the hell will I pay that extra 30,000? I would seriously settle for Aiwa, and that's a purely rational decision. But my sense is for every one person who does this, there is another person who's saying, no, 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 I'm not having some Iowa in my house. No way, man. It
exactly.
doesn't. So that is not
Exactly.
somehow rationally, the same argument, but it doesn't seem to work for some people. Whereas,
Yeah,
the rationality works for some people. Stories work with everybody. That's the whole
right,
point of it. The stories is
right,
it short circuits that whole thing, and it somehow charms you into saying, hey,
right,
sidestep the whole thing. You like this, no? So suddenly this even Unilever and all in the 90s and stuff, P&G, all of them started talking about likability of ad. Previously, it used to be,
right,
these points, and are we covering it? Are we making sure this is being conveyed? The 80s was a disaster that way. But slowly, once the storytelling got proven in terms of very good brands that we've seen come out of the 90s and all that, I think the story, I mean, the sort of narrative shifted even within the industry and among the marketing fraternity that somewhere that these stories
right.
told well
Seems to be,
carried
yeah.
its weight. That if your brand was liked, you just increased your fighting chances just that bit more.